Okay, today our learning target is I can identify the solid figure that will be formed by a net. Some groups got to work with nets yesterday, but some of you did not. So real quick, first thing we're going to do is look at what is a net, because I'm sure when you see net, you probably think of some other things. This is a multiple meaning word, so you might be thinking about like a fishing net or a net on a basketball hoop. But in geometry, in solids, a net is a plane. And remember, this word means flat, or aka two-dimensional figure that can be folded up to make a solid figure. Okay, more than one net may form the same solid figure. We will mostly be focusing just on one net for one solid today. So what you see here, this dotted line on this net, this is this net when it's kind of halfway or partially folded, and it will make a solid right here, a cube. And then right here is where these lines are where you would do your folding. Okay, so if you were in the classroom right now, you would have some nets in front of you, you'd be cutting them and folding them. Okay, now here is my advice for you. The most important thing for you to look at when you are determining what net goes with what figure, so let's pretend like, let me put a shape over the top of this so we're not looking at it. Let's pretend that we don't know and we're trying to figure out what solid this net will make. The most important thing that you can do is look at the flat shapes or the polygons that make up this net. So if I asked you right now, fifth graders, what do you notice about the shape of this figure right here? You would say, well, Ms. Brocker, that's a square. And I'd say, okay, let's look at all the other faces. And you would say, they're all squares. And then I'd say, what solid do you know is made up from all square faces? And then you would say, oh, it's a cube. So this net makes a cube. Now, the purpose of this video is not for you to memorize all the shapes of nets, but just to get some practice seeing them and using them. Okay, next we have a net of a rectangular prism, and I know that because I can see that all of the faces are rectangles, or we might even have bases here and here that are squares, and then this face is rectangular, 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 rectangular. This forms a rectangular prism. So I know that by just looking at this net and saying, what are the two-dimensional shapes that make that net before it's folded up? Okay, now we're going to practice this a little bit like we did the other day with solids, naming solids. So first thing I want you to do on your whiteboard right now, I want you to write name. We're only going to do a couple of these right now. We're going to name this shape, that the solid that this net will form, and we're going to name the base. We're going to do that by looking at the net and finding the name of the base, and then we're going to answer that question of pyramid or prism. These two elements together will help us name our shape. So go ahead and take a look at this. Now, I would even argue that it is a little bit harder for you to identify your base when you're looking at a net than you have looking at a solid, because that solid you can flip around and everything. The base is two-dimensional, it is flat, but some of these you're going to notice the base shape jumps out at you right away. Do you see it? Right here, this is our base, and this is a square. And the reason why I know that is the base, because if I can imagine this, and you have to have a really good imagination today, imagine this being folded up. I see that these triangle pieces will all be folded up and meet together at these edges, and they will form one vertex at the very top. Okay? Now that also tells me, other than the base, that also tells me that this is not a prism, it is a pyramid, because all these triangle figures will meet together. So when we go to name this, this is a square, taking this piece from square, pyramid. Okay, let's go ahead and do another one. Ooh, okay. Now, this one is one of ours where we don't really have to do pyramid or prism. We know it is neither. There are three figures that you should be able to see and recognize right away. So go ahead and look at this polygon that makes up our base of our shape. You see that those are circles? I want you to imagine, kind of if this were a can, that you could take this piece and roll it around. And as you did, that rectangular piece would go around the circle. So this forms a cylinder. So there are three figures that you kind of just have to be able to look at and recognize without having to do that base shape, and they are this: cylinder, cone, and lastly, which you won't see a whole lot in 5th grade, is a sphere. And this is also like, we call this the shape of like a basketball or a ball, ice cream cone, and then we did some stuff with cylinders, cans, and all that. But still, I know that has to be either a cone or a sphere, cone or cylinder based on the base shape of a circle. Okay. Ooh, this one looks hard. Okay, go ahead on your whiteboards right now. I want you to write name. And if you can name this right away, wonderful, that's great. I'm going to write another line here for our base shape. So what flat shape is our base, or our bases in this case? And then lastly, we're going to answer prism or pyramid. Okay, now I already kind of gave you a hint. I said bases. Did you hear that? I said, I didn't even mean to say it. Didn't mean to give you that answer. So when you go ahead and look at this, remember, we either have one base if we have a pyramid, or two bases if we have a prism. And if we have a pyramid, we'll have one base and the rest of the faces will be triangles. If we have a prism, we will have two bases and the rest of the faces will either be rectangles or squares. So here's what I notice right now. I notice we have this shape and this shape that are different. Think about what we did yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and count the sides of this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, okay. So the base shape, and there are two identical bases, so that tells me right away prism. And this is a 5-sided figure, also known as a pentagon. Then to find the name of the solid that this will make, what we're going to do is use this, and we're going to put them together. Okay? So this is a pentagonal prism. And if we were to fold this into a solid, all we would do is, some of you might like origami and stuff, we would be folding on these dotted lines, and then that is where this shape would start to come together. We'd have to use tape, or sometimes on nets, you'll also see like a little flap right here. So you'll also see like an extra little piece. This is not part of our solid, but it is just there to help us attach it to the rest of the solid. So if you try and use just the solid, just the net with no other edges on it, you might notice that it's hard to either glue or paste together. So sometimes during nets, you'll see this. Okay, that's all we're going to do for today. We'll be matching these nets with images of their solids on your practice, and this should be helpful for you if you watch.